My name is Saad. I have been working in this space for close to 30 years, and most of that in BlueYonder WMS. So I worked at BlueYonder as well, and since then I am been working in a consulting capacity. So with that, we would get into today's presentation, which is about BlueYonder cloud offering that they have. The way I have broken it out is that I would go through it in the following order. That first I would go over some core concepts, basically understand what do we mean by cloud. So I would go over some of the basic terminology of that space. Then I would go over the BlueYonder WMS architecture and how that works with cloud framework, cloud environment. Then what would my cloud look like? If you were to go to BlueYonder Cloud, then what is your experience for the various, what is your end user experience? What is advanced user experience? What is developer experience? What does that all mean? Then I would do a little bit of a cloud reality check so that what should be our expectation when we are in the cloud environment. And then we would do a Q&A afterwards. First, a bit of a disclaimer that what we are doing today is not a sales pitch or anything like that. It's basically we are going at publicly available information. And then all the discussions, suggestions, everything that we are going to make is more on an academic nature. Every detail must be vetted with the vendor or any other parties that are involved. And the content which has been taken from any source has been sourced on the relevant slides. So first, let's go over some of the concepts, right? So first of all, I want to just make sure that any intimidation factor from the word cloud goes away, right? So cloud is not something that world just figured out. Hey, we can do something on the internet in terms of resources. So the idea was born first time when the two computers were networks. Right? That's where it all started. And idea of sharing computing capability is also not new. So none of these are new concepts. Of course, the prevalence of the internet has made things easier. There are data centers which are in several organizations already, right? So though that is also a type of cloud when you have your organization spread all over the world and then you have a data center someplace else, that is type of a cloud. VMware technology and related technologies have certainly made this endeavor that much easier because it has simplified the concepts of hardware provisioning. And so basic message is that it's an age-old concept, nothing to be intimidated by the word cloud. It is basically a nice packaging around some things which we already know and already have been known to do for a long time. So certainly since the word terminology has become more prevalent, some very nice, it has been divided in a very nice fashion so that we can understand the concept. So generally when we are talking about cloud, and AAS stands for as a service world, right? So there are generally three types of offerings in as a service world. First, which is probably the easiest to understand, is infrastructure as a service. So when you go to Azure or Amazon Cloud and you get a VM, you have gotten a flavor of the cloud, you have gotten a service from the cloud, and you have gotten something very basic, which is a VM. So you have gotten an infrastructure on the cloud, right? So next level up, a little bit more abstract than that, is platform as a service. So for example, if you again take an example of Microsoft Azure, if you got a SQL database on Azure, you basically got platform. The basic thing that you can watch out for is that whenever you go to more abstraction from like infrastructure to platform, the lower level is abstracted from you. So when you are on Azure SQL, you don't really care about what platform it is, what operating system or what infrastructure it is running on. So that is, you go to higher abstraction, the lower levels are hidden from you. Then next level up would be SaaS, which is software as a service. So that's where you would have BlueYonder WMS, you would have Office 365, you have Gmail, you have Dropbox, all of these things. And same idea that when you are on software as a service, then the lower levels are abstracted from you. So you don't care about what underlying system Office 365 uses, what VMs it's running on, how many VMs it's running on, all of that is abstracted from you. So again, as you move up, complexity goes up and abstraction goes up. So this is another way to look at the same stack. Same idea that as at the lowest level you have infrastructure like networks and firewalls and all that kind of stuff like VMs, and then next level up you have platform, and next level up you have the software as a service. And one of the key things that you are getting is that whenever you are at a level, you get elasticity at the lower levels as well as an implied. So for example, if you are in Azure SQL, then your SLAs and everything is around what that SQL is supposed to give you. And if that requires how many VMs or underneath, that is not something that you care about or that's even exposed to you. Similarly, as you go up the chain and you go to software as a service, then whatever is below is abstracted from you, and you are getting that elasticity as an implied elasticity in that level. So elasticity is the key benefit of cloud computing as it is set up these days, so that you do not have to constantly resize or anything like that. You are basically agreeing to certain SLAs, protocols, agreements, time requirements, and then everything needs to just fall in place in order to make that all happen, and so that we can all take advantage of that. Another very important is that whoever is your vendor, their risk factor, their exposure goes up as well. So you would see that when the various services are priced, etc., that somebody who is offering SaaS is assuming the risk of the lower levels in it. So that is where how the services may be priced, why the service cost might be higher, is that a SaaS provider is assuming the risk of platform and infrastructure in their offering. Similarly, if it's a platform, then of course they're assuming that risk and SLA requirements of the lower levels. So that's a very important consideration when we are critiquing the various options that are available. What do they all mean? How they are priced, etc. So this is another very important slide where we see where is the trend, where are we going towards. So the total market is expected to be at about $350 billion. And then you see that if I can combine the business process as a service and software as a service, that alone would be around 200 billion. So again, two things: that first of all, they are going to be priced higher whenever somebody is offering software as a service and a business process as a service, because they are assuming risk of the lower level. But generally, this also means that there are a lot of services that are being exposed as that option. That also is a very important caveat. So generally, the message is that this is where the world is going. And again, as we would go through the slide, we would see that there is a good reason to think cloud in every aspect of this supply chain. So what are the key players in the as a service market? Again, some of these words are no surprise. Some of these companies, these are the top tier companies: Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Every time if you are subscribing to the news in this space, you would see basically these three names coming up quite often. Google is improving quite a bit. So these are the common players, but then you have some other players as well, like Oracles and IBMs of the world. But the fourth quadrant having Microsoft and Amazon should not be a surprise. So now I would go into BlueYonder architecture and how it relates to the cloud. So in that space, this slide I wanted to just mention because this is, a slide which has been there in all documentations from BlueYonder, previously JDA, previously Redgrave, previously McHugh. And I just wanted to put it there to just exemplify that how good the architecture of the underlying system is. That this is from the time when nobody was talking about cloud. So since 90s, the left slide is what you would see in all documentation of Mocha, which is the application server of Redgrave. The right side is basically a little bit different view where it is showing the protocols and etc., which go underneath. So again, idea being, all along, Mocha was architected with the mindset that you would have clients that would be consuming services over the network. It's evolved from a proprietary protocol to HTTP protocol for over about a decade now. And then you have services. In some documentation, actually, we use the term service all along. So it's those are the Mocha commands, and then their implementation is abstracted. So all along, the architecture of Mocha was always something which was ready to be consumed by this. So that is a general theme that I would go over, that many of these concepts that we would go over should not be a surprise to many who are already familiar with this space of Mocha Red Query. So many of these concepts are the same. One other concept that we need to make sure that we understand is of scaling. So generally, scaling is how do you address the hardware level for increased load. So there are generally two ways you could scale. One is vertical scaling. Vertical scaling means that you add more memory to your server, you add more CPUs to the server, that kind of, or you get a better CPU. Those would all be termed as vertical scaling. So you're scaling up. That's the term you would use. Horizontal scaling is where you add more servers or more VMs in the today's world to that space. So that is just, I wanted to mention it there, because if you are today in an on-premise solution, you might be have like a really big servers already, and you might not be using horizontal scaling today. Chances are, again, many of these things would be based on your SLAs with BlueYonder, that you may end up with a horizontally scaled out solution in BlueYonder cloud. If that happens, then you have certain associated headaches, which are not because of cloud, but because of horizontal scaling. So when you go to horizontal scaling, then it means you have multiple rollouts to install on the various servers, you have multiple log folders. So all of those are part and parcel of horizontal scaling. So generally speaking, that's why horizontal scaling is not fun. It creates its own headaches. But I wanted to just mention it out there that chances are, again, all of these are decisions that BlueYonder would make based on how they set up, that you would have a horizontally scaled solution, even though you might not have a horizontally scaled solution today. So as scaling relates to Mocha, again, very good news there as well, that Mocha has been a 64-bit platform for a while. So which means that all the vertical scaling options have been there for a while, which means that you have a lot of memory that you can expand to. You can have a lot of CPUs that you can expand to, all which are advantage of the fact that it's a 64-bit platform. So you can go to bigger and better hardware. Scaling out is also something which is natively supported in Mocha, which means that you can have a cluster. So cluster is basically a feature of scaling out. So you can have cluster, any number of nodes in a cluster. They would be cluster aware. They would, and we use industry standard technologies for that. So they would know who are the members of the cluster and everything like that. So that is something which has been there in Mocha for a long time. But any headaches that come because of horizontal scaling are part and parcel of being horizontal scale. It runs on Oracle and SQL Server already. It supports all the latest platforms, Windows, Linux, Java, and it supports all the clustering natively. So again, as well as the scaling goes, we have a lot of options in that space. So now let's go get into Mocha and how it meets the cloud. So one thing which I want to it would be a recurring theme is that if you are coming from an on-premise environment, if you are familiar with Mocha, cloud should not intimidate you in any respect. Cloud is not a new term. Cloud has been there forever. It's just a packaging around some of the things and some of the concepts. It is the Mocha architecture has always been where you can consume services. That is a very good thing. Even today, there might be some businesses, some installations where we have a old methodology of a data center within the warehouse, but that is a concept which is really almost an obsolete concept. So most organizations have a data center already, whether it is their own data center, they're co-locating or whatever. So which means that this idea of a server being some central location should not be intimidating either. Mocha always looked at the world in a database independent view. All of the solutions we would write would be in a database independent fashion. Services are consumable over standard protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, SSL. All of that is already there, so nothing new there. 64-bit platform has been there for a long time, so that itself is nothing new. Clustering and load balancing is available for a long time. So when we go from on-prem to cloud, there is no reason to be intimidated by that discussion, no reason to be concerned about that discussion, no reason to be in any way, shape, or form think that we are getting into something new inherently. Many of these things should work out nicely, and we can judge make them various decisions based truly on merit and not based on being intimidated by any term or any technology. So now I would get into, so now we know so far that cloud is not something to be worried about. Term should not intimidate us. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service are terms that help us navigate the maze of understanding what is what. Mocha is a cloud-friendly application server. Again, none of the concepts there needed a fundamental re-architecture to make it work in the cloud. All of that is pretty much the same. So if you are moving from a on-premise to cloud, nothing should be a big surprise. So what would my cloud look like if you were to go from an on-premise to cloud, or if you're just starting afresh? What am I signing up for? So again, as I indicated earlier, BlueYonder WMS on cloud would be classified as software as a service, right? It's a software as a service. So as is generally accepted practice, that if you're going there, then you do not worry. It would be a much healthier conversation if we do not worry about lower levels and we do not insist on lower levels. So that would be much healthier discussion, that we are simply saying, I want BlueYonder WMS in the cloud, and this is what I need to run with. This is my load. Again, the discussion needs to be much more abstract in terms of business and not overly concerned with lower levels. So that would be much better discussion, much healthier discussion. And we already said that it's fundamentally the same solution as an on-premise solution. So nothing there should be intimidating, except for that it would be running on typically Microsoft Azure and Azure SQL databases, and that again should not be much of a concern. What you can do in the cloud, I would basically, another term I would use several times is basically a rent versus buy analogy, right? So can a room in your house be painted, right? It can always be painted. Can you put a new gadget into your car? Yes, you can always put a new gadget in the car. That whether you are allowed to do that is, if it is a rented scenario, then it is whatever is allowed in your lease or whatever is allowed in your contract. So that is a very important term, that when we say that something can be done, we are saying that your room can be painted, but whether you're allowed to paint it would be based on what you're allowed per your contract. So it is very important to understand that thing. Another thing that you are your system is going to be housed in somebody else's network, right? So in that scenario, there would be, so for example, if you want 3 ports to be opened out, there would be a pushback to say, why do you need it? And these are good things. So these are not something I wouldn't even use the word pushback or something. That is a very good critique. I would be much more concerned if the vendor said yes to every request. That is a much more concerning point of view versus saying that if you want a certain port open and you're asked, okay, why is it open? Is there any other way to work? Those are all good discussion, and you would be challenged on that, and that is a good thing. That is something which is very healthy, and because BlueYonder is carrying a huge risk by hosting the system within their framework. And another thing is that as consumers, we must learn to give up control over platform and infrastructure. So that is again a very important discussion. In some respect, that might become a highlight of the discussions, and it should not. That's where the senior leadership of the customer should ensure that once the decision has been made to go to software as a service, then we must not argue or spend time over, hey, why is it SQL Server? Why is it not Oracle? Why is it Windows? Those are discussions which are moot at that point once you have committed to going at a software as a service. But on the flip side, what we also have to understand is that cloud is not magic, right? There is no magic in cloud. It is still same system running over in somebody else's cloud center. It is still the same Mocha. So whatever can happen wrong can still happen. So let's not assume that there is magic happening there, or let's not have unrealistic requirements or unrealistic expectations. Another thing which, so if you are in an organization which had good controls already, this would not be a surprise. But if you were an organization where you developers had free access to production, you could solve an urgent need by just doing an M-build on production. Well, for good reason, again, a very good thing, that you're not going to be allowed to do that. It's a production is a sacred environment. There will be defined protocols to access it. And those are all good things. These are not, I would even classify as something which you should be concerned about because that is how it should have always been. Most likely your system might be clustered, which would have its own headaches, but then again, those are not specific to cloud. That's basically if you are used to cluster, then you're already used to those issues. Platform choice, it is what it is, right? It is not Linux, most likely, and it is not going to be other than Azure SQL, right? So that is what it is. So no point arguing about, hey, why is not Oracle? That is what it is, but that is not something that you need to worry about too much either, because again, your agreement, your SLAs are based on your business requirements. So whatever needs to happen under the hood would happen to meet your SLAs. Security, again, that is a very good thing, but if you are not used to a very high level of security for production environments and production protocols, this is basically an elephant in the room. That security is in 2021 would be a major topic, a major concern. What kind of levels access is available, what directories are going to be exposed. If you have automation system, how is that going to talk? Those are all discussions that need to happen. But again, it would be all security centric and as it should be, as it ought to be. And you would only have defined protocols. So yes, Mocha can talk HTTP and HTTPS and SSL or no SSL, but when you're going to cloud, again, security centric, so decisions would be made. You would not be allowed to have a write access to the database. All of those are going to be things which are basically security centric decisions, good decision, which many organizations might be already used to, but if you're not, then that is something which is going to be very central. So what would the basic setup? So let's say you have decided to go to SaaS. So what does it mean? What needs to happen? So at the network level, the two organizations need to talk to each other. So your network folks would already know what I'm talking about there. There would be whitelisting and all that kind of stuff going on so that BlueYonder Cloud can talk to whatever your on-premise system is. That needs to happen. Of course, your printers are physical printers in your facilities, so you would have some sort of a print server in your side of the cloud, your side of the systems, which would then control the printer. So that is typically how it would be. Almost all cases, you have to exchange data. So you would have to talk about how the file shares are set up. Are the file shares on the customer side, or they are in the BlueYonder side? That discussion needs to happen, but there needs to be some way of exchanging data between them. LDAP should not be assumed. Again, anytime we're talking about ports and protocols, nothing should be assumed. So if that LDAP is a requirement, it needs to be discussed upfront with the customer that, hey, we would need LDAP. What would that mean? Make sure it's all, again, rent versus buy analogy, house painting analogy. Don't assume anything. If LDAP is your requirement, bring the topic up front so that can be allowed in that space. Single sign-on is something which is possible using Azure SSO, but those kind of thing becomes very much a function of what your organization would allow. So this is something from a publicly available BlueYonder article that with Azure SSO, you can do single sign-on with small setup requirements that it requires. On-premise automation systems would always be a topic. You would, because all those systems would most likely not be in cloud, so they are on-premise. So you would have to make sure that how do you talk to them. Certain ports would be open, etc. Some other external systems would always be there. If you have SAPs, if you have Oracle, how are they going to talk to this system? That discussion would need to happen. You might be using queuing technology. So all of that discussion needs to happen, that how are they going to talk to the BlueYonder cloud. So many of these discussions are at a lower level, at a network level, and at the contract negotiation level, so that we make sure that whatever are those windows that you need opened up are explicitly spelled out early on. So that is the key message here, that do not let these kinds of discussions drag on until your validation starts. Let them know early on what kind of access you would require. So these are all legitimate requests. What would and generally, BlueYonder, we have found them very professional, very easy to work with in that kind of a scenario. Whenever you would get challenged, the challenging is for a good reason, because they might that discussion might expose certain other options which would be more secure. And security is the common goal. Security is your goal as much as BlueYonder's goal. So that is all a very healthy discussion. But none of them are showstoppers. Just make sure that we discuss these things early on and not let them sit until we are later in the game. So now I want to again get a little bit of give a feel of what it means when you are running in cloud, right? So first, for example, end user, the person on the floor, what is their experience? What are they seeing? So I would be very impressed if somebody could tell that they are on cloud, right? Because there's absolutely zero difference for them. So the first here on the left up, I am showing that how they would log on to the web screen. Again, you give a username, your password, your URL would be something interesting, but that's about it. If you are going for fat client is still a possibility for certain use cases, even in 2020 version. So again, you're launching a fat client, you're giving the URL, username, password, warehouse, that's it. Again, very similar. If you're logging onto RF, again, this is showing what a putty session would look like. Very similar. It's, of course, it would be SSH, but that's about it. If you're going to console, same thing. So again, end user would not know any difference in terms of their experience between cloud and non-cloud versions. Of course, when you're, it most likely be a cluster, so you might see a little bit difference from that aspect, but nothing because of cloud. So then we get to a little bit advanced users, like advanced users who are doing some advanced setup and that kind of thing. So for them also, there is not much of a difference, so to say, between cloud and on. So ad hoc access is still possible. Server command operations is there in the FAT client, even in the latest versions. Printers will be set up using a print queue, so that if they're setting up printers, they would be slightly different use case and places where they would put information, but nothing that is essentially inherently different. One thing is that, again, it is running in BlueYonder. They are promising certain SLAs. So what data is available online, like how many days of data versus archive, is something which you need to make sure that you spell out early on in the discussion. Because again, they are promising to meet SLAs of a production environment. So general idea would be that they would want as little of data available on production, so that the production database is as healthy as possible and requires as little maintenance as possible on a recurring basis. So that is something which is, so if you have a certain requirement of how much data must be available in the online system, that should be clearly spelled out early on, right? Otherwise, by default, they would want to put, as they should, much more aggressive archiving protocols. And then, again, no magic. Accidents are still possible if you do not put up appropriate protocols. For example, if somebody goes into production, an advanced user, and changes allocation search path or pick policies, well, there is a price to pay for that. And that's nothing that cloud is going to, by magic, solve those kinds of problems. If it's a use case that an advanced user was allowed to access, then that use case could have associate cost penalty and performance penalty and accident that it could cause. So that, again, cloud would give you certain benefits of quickly being able to restore quickly if it ever gets to that point. But again, not expect any magic. It is advanced user perspective should be pretty similar to what they're used to. So developer perspective, what is developer seeing if you're making some changes and whatnot? So fundamentally, what BlueYonder would require is that any changes are delivered as a rollout. So if you are familiar with what a rollout means, then that's what, at a very low level, that is the protocol that you would. So if you're going to be allowed to make a change, only thing that would be required is that the changes are delivered as a rollout. So you would definitely not be able to change a file in production and do an unbuild. That is a no. But otherwise, you can of course give a rollout. You can certainly request from BlueYonder a server for your development practice. So that would be another cloud server that would be available. And then your experience would be very similar to what you are used to do. So you can change objects. For example, you could use Mocha client, our Mocha client, to change the object. You can change integrations and whatnot. All of that is what a development experience is supposed to be. You can do mbuild. After that, you would have from console, you can restart, or by connecting to the server, you could do a service restart, all of that kind of thing. And then you would have to package your changes into a rollout. So that is what developer experience used to be, right? That is what a developer experience should have been all along. If you are changing files in production or QA, that was not a good thing anyways. So there is nothing inherently different from a developer's experience, that you make the changes, you package them, and you deliver them. Here I would just mention a little bit of I'm calling it developer perspective 2.0. So like if you used our tool set, SmartIS provided tool set for development, then the experience would be that much more improved, and then it would be no difference. So if anybody is using the SmartIS tool set, then they would see little or no difference if they were to go to the cloud. So what is our experience for those who might not be familiar with that? Is that what we have a screen available on fat line, on thin line, called issue assignments. You basically say that, hey, I'm working on this issue. And then once you have said that I'm working on an issue, then you can go and change any source code file, any integration, any policies, any DDAs, any advanced configuration, storage configuration, all that kind of stuff. You can go just simply make the changes. And our tool set basically is tracking all of those changes. So you don't worry about it at all. You just say, I'm making the changes, and you save. And at the end, you say that I'm done. When you say you are done, then those changes are automatically committed to a version control repository. So we support Git, SVN, and TFS. So they would be committed there, and then you would build a rollout from there. So all of that experience, you never have to build a manual rollout. You never have to worry about keeping track of what I changed, so I can build the right rollout. All of that goes away. So that's basically developer perspective 2.0. If you were using our toolset before, then going to cloud would mean absolutely no change, because you would just use the same exact methodology in the cloud framework as well. So with the developer perspective 2.0 comes packaging perspective 2.0. So if you are not using our tool set, then the typical methodology that people follow is that developer first makes the changes, then they offer some prayers, and then they make a rollout, making sure that they did not miss any objects in that rollout, and then more prayers, and then you deploy that rollout. That's a typical experience of packaging if you don't have our tool set. With our tool set, which we support Jira, Git, and we also support Bugzilla SVN framework. In that case, what happens is that you simply, once you have said that I'm done with my change, as I said, that pressing that complete would automatically commit your source code, your data, like integrations, policies, everything, to a version control repository. Then a same person or a different person simply has to go to, if they're one of these screens, so if there's a Bugzilla, then it's the screen on the right. If it's a Jira, then it's a screen on the left. They go and indicate which issues they want to make a rollout for, and then they just press create. That would go and create a Redberry compatible rollout, and that's it. Then it just, you follow the protocols then on to get it deployed into the higher level environment. So that's packaging perspective. So that is something, just a slight deviation to say that what developer experience would be and what a developer experience can be if we are able to use our tool set. Then a little bit on integration. So what is the default? As I indicated earlier, default mechanism generally is to exchange files. So files are generally going to be a little bit of a headache to manage, especially if you're going to a horizontally scaled system, because the typical from host folder is not something you can utilize because every node would have a different from host folder. Similarly, if you are used to just inserting data directly into the production database using a stored procedure or whatever, that is again something you, for good reason, would not be allowed. So then you are left with either you use an advanced queuing system, Oracle AQ or MSMQ or something like that, or what we have used is this thing that which I'm just giving a very brief overview here. That what we have done is that generally speaking, we want to move away from files for a lot of good reasons, because files, if you have 10,000 files in a directory, that becomes a nightmare in itself. Files also have a problem in respect of clustering and stuff like that. So what, and BlueYonder would generally be okay with the idea of calling a web service to do something with the system. So what we have done is this kind of a solution that we put this table structure in, and then we have a set of web services which would allow you to query this table or put data into this table. So again, then what your external systems are doing is, and the external system would always be client, so they can call the web service as a client and say, hey, is there any new data available? And they get the whole XML, whole large XML, there's no limit on the amount of data as a response to that request, or they would call as a client and put new data there. Again, this framework has a lot of other advantages as well. The first one is not files. So if you have 100,000 records in this table, I won't be worried too much about it. It is very easy to query because we allow you to put in some reference data along with it whenever you're putting data. So it's later on easy to query. So that is, and it can also support ideas of putting PDFs and whatnot in as well. Generally speaking, I just wanted to mention that using something like that could ease your discussion in cloud for exchanging data, because it's very similar to a file concept that you're putting the contents of the file, but in a database table. And it is you're not doing it directly via database API, but you're doing it via web service, which should generally be accepted. Again, we need to make sure that this is discussed with BlueYonder first, but then you would get a lot of other advantages and you'll be able to integrate much easier. Then another thing is that automated testing is a solution that we have which would allow you to test the system both for performance and also for end user level testing easily. So there are some other solutions available in that space as well. Let me acknowledge that. But the idea is that upgrades were never difficult technically in BlueYonder. So since way back the first versions, the idea was that you would just put on a new system and you would run DB upgrade and everything would upgrade. So upgrade was always a problem because it's such a complex environment that after upgrade you need to revalidate everything. And the more warehouses you have, the more complex your use cases are, and that is the basic reason why procrastination happened. It was not that technically it was so difficult, it was basically what it entailed afterwards. So what this solution does is that it does not require, our solution does not require anything, any instrumentation in the environment. So you basically, it's an independent thing. It does not, you would just go using Mocha client, point to an environment, and then you can just run tests automatically that you define. So you can just say run a order from a download to dispatch, different types of orders, and you would not need anybody to babysit it. It can do Mocha, which should cover most of the cases anyway, because again, the application server is that sophisticated, but it can also do RF. It can launch RFs and it can launch GUIs as well. And it can also look ahead in the data. So it makes very easy to, for example, if you want to do a wave to dispatch, it's very easy because it can look ahead and see, okay, what should I type in as the list ID? What should I type in as the work ref? It can look ahead and it can do so. You can run it over and over again, the same kinds of tests. And it can perform stress testing as well. So again, if you're going to cloud and you're a little bit of an apprehension that will that SQL Server environment be able to handle our load, even though the SLAs say so, do I have a concern? So that is something which we would be able to handle as well. It can do stress testing. And then another general tangent, what we can take is that as we are into the cloud, we have certain solutions like JBoard and Metron, is that if you want to then open up your application to JBoard, basically idea is that you have these displays often time in warehouses to display certain things, right? You can of course run a DDA there, but that requires certain modifications that you would have to make into the system. Versus this is an outside application, which means that you can just put it on, and you would not have, it would not be conflicting with BlueYonder's own methodologies and life cycle of changes. So that is, those are some of the themes. So again, idea being that you can deal with the idea of staying current much more easily with these kinds of solutions. So this was all a tangent from the developer and packaging experience. So then next, what was your DBAs or system administrators perspective? That is where it would be, they would enjoy it the most, because it is not their infrastructure and is not their platform. So which means that who can touch the platform infrastructure is only BlueYonder's own resources. So which means that your in-house DBAs would not, they can of course provide their input and their best expertise, but they will not have access most likely to the underlying layers, and that is where it would, yeah, this is an extremely positive thing, because that experience would make it that much simpler, because there are less people who are touching the infrastructure and platform, and less people that are touching, less chances of inadvertent side effect to be caused. So now I want to go a little bit of a reality check and some myth busting, right? So that we should not have false expectations, wrong expectations in a cloud. So one wrong expectation might be, hey, I'm going to the cloud, so I do not have to worry about upgrades. Well, very much you have to still worry about the upgrades. Actually, more so, because now BlueYonder might be insisting that you upgrade. So upgrade was never a technical problem. So again, upgrading BlueYonder WMS was never a technical problem. It was always a problem that what it entails afterwards: validation, testing, customization, retrofitting, and that's what the discussion was always. So you still have to very much worry about upgrade, and maybe more so because we might have to meet our own side of the equation in terms of keeping our software up to date. So something like automated testing could certainly help in that respect. Another thing could be that I cannot make any changes because I am in cloud. That again is not true. This should be explicitly discussed upfront with the vendor, of course. But then if you're allowed to make certain changes, then those would be allowed to make. There's nothing inherently in the cloud framework which inhibits the ability of making a change. Again, house wall can be painted. It is just that does your lease allow it, and what kind of paint is allowed on that wall. The next is that who does the upgrade, right? That is again something not overly concerned, that whether it is BlueYonder doing the retrofit, as is their stay current program, which I would go over a little bit later. We should not have a false expectation that it will be done for free, right? So whether you are paying for it upfront in form of your subscription fees, or whether you later on, customization would need retrofitting, and you would somehow pay for it, right? So that, again, let's not have a false expectation that because I'm going to cloud, I'm getting this additional service for free. That would be a false expectation. And another one would be that when I call support, hey, I am in cloud, so I expect that my unique setup with my unique ERP, with my unique automation system, the guy on the other end should know exactly what my problem is. That's a false expectation. That's a wrong expectation. That is not what it's going to be. They would definitely know many things much quicker, right? Because they're hosting so many solutions. If there's a bug or something like that, they would probably know about it much sooner. But then a very specific, unique question would take a little bit of time to troubleshoot. That should be the expectation that we should have with any such situation. Or another would be that cost would be much lower. That again is a not a correct expectation. Cloud competes on quality. Cloud does not compete on cost alone. So if we say that, hey, I'm going to cloud, so my bill on the first month afterwards should be that much lower, it would be not a right expectation. So this is I just wanted to give this publicly available information, BlueYonder Stay Current program. It is a very good thing that they have come up with. that you can, as you're making changes, you can, I think this is a requirement for the cloud scenarios, that you would have to subscribe to the stay current program, which means that on the technical side, your retrofits are going to be handled. But again, let's not make sure that we lose sight of the fact that after the technical change, validation is still a requirement of the customer, where automated testing or something like that would come in. And and because it will be BlueYonder doing it, so they would always try to identify core functionality, which again is a very good thing out of this. So this is a very good program, which should help us keeping it up to date. But let's not have false expectation that it is certainly something which you would be paying for, and then it's something which would take its due time. That retrofit would still need to happen. Who does it, and validation would still be required. So this is again publicly available what a support plan looks like. Again, these things would change over time, evolve over time, but I wanted to highlight that to make sure that we are comfortable with BlueYonder as a cloud service provider, that they know what they are doing. And the next slide of how many customers they are supporting. This all should imply that going with BlueYonder Cloud should not be something which we should be overly concerned about in terms of their ability to handle it, in terms of their experience, in terms of who they're hosting. All of that would be good reasons for going to the cloud, right? So that is one way of deciphering, okay, what would be the reason to go to the cloud? These would be the reasons to go to the cloud, is that you are having all these advantages, and BlueYonder Cloud is definitely a company which knows what they're doing in this space. They are the vendor, so these would be all the reasons to go to the cloud. They have strong SLAs. They have their own internal commitment to the cloud framework. So these are all the reasons for going to the cloud. But then the other opposite, of course, we should always critique that what would be the reason to not go to the cloud. So in that respect, I think these would be the typical reasons for not going to the cloud. So cost, rather than cost would be a reason that you might decide that cloud is not worth it. So cost, you might realize that cost is so high in the cloud compared to your on-premise solution that you might decide that cloud is not going to be the way to go. And that cost can come in because BlueYonder WMS in a large organization is a very small, very tiny part of the whole supply chain play. So for example, if you have an on-premise ERP, if you have on-premise systems for maintaining all other aspects of it, just by moving to the BlueYonder WMS to the cloud, you did not really alleviate the risk that much. And but you're paying a high price, and then on top of that, you might still have this not resource optimization possibility, because you still are maintaining a lot of other systems. So that would be again a reason. Cost would end up being a critical reason. Restriction on platform, again, if that becomes a very important discussion, that might be a reason. If you just have to have Linux and have to have Oracle, those might be the reasons for not going to the cloud. And in that space, what we should understand is that even if you're not going to SaaS model, infrastructure as a service and platform as a service might still be possibilities without SaaS. If you are going to that, of course, then the cost becomes, as you go down the abstraction, the cost becomes that much more attractive. But those are the reasons for not going to the cloud. So just at the end, I want to summarize that cloud is an excellent option. That should be the default option. If we are thinking about upgrades, if we are thinking about new implementations, cloud should be the default. And in that space, I think SaaS should be the default choice. And then we can analyze and critique afterwards that if we need to go there, or we need an on-premise solution. We should clarify the requirements upfront. That is something very important, especially around security. In the world 2021 we live in, with ransomwares and whatnot, security is going to be the elephant in the room. Clarify all requirements upfront very clearly, so that we know what ports need to be opened up. If there are red flags that are raised, that should be raised upfront so that some alternates can be imagined. Everything is possible. Again, rent versus buy analogy, everything is possible. Just make sure that everything is spelled out early on, what kind of access you would need, what type of enhancements you would think about making. All of that should be described early on. And cloud is about quality and not cost. So don't let cost be the driving factor. Of course, in the long term, you would end up say it would be a lot of non-tangible benefits in cloud, but in the short term, to make cost be the central issue might not be a very healthy thing to look at. And stay engaged. Very important that just because you're going to cloud doesn't mean that you should not be engaged with the vendor throughout the project. Engagement is very important, and then even afterwards, engagement is very important. And do not expect magic. It's still a Mocha application server running in a cluster environment in a data center. So don't expect any magic. It's the same system. So I think that's basically it. We were given some questions, but in the meantime, you can certainly ask questions and in the question window if you have. Some of the questions I had was that how is it working within the constraint of BlueYonder Cloud? Like how is the end experience working with BlueYonder? So in that respect, BlueYonder is, they're never unreasonable, but they're instituting best practices. So in some respects, if you are not used to the best practices of sacredness of production, security protocols, that is kind of you would face a little bit resistance. But in all, I've never found them to be like stonewalling or obstructionist or something like that. It's basically a very healthy conversation. But again, if you give it to start discussion early, you would have that much easier to work with. It's very not such a big deal to work within the constraints of BlueYonder Cloud. What may be the hardest thing in working in the cloud? So in that respect, because again, the same idea there is a production is sacred, QA is sacred, the protocols of going into those environments are very much regimented, cutovers become very difficult. Cutovers are where, for example, you would go from where you might be used to just logging on a server, running mloads and stuff like that. Those would be that much difficult. But we have tools available at SmartIaaS called Warehouse Migrator and stuff like that, where we would go and take QA to production. So we would be that much sure that the changes have gone into production.
And Saad, I'm available too if you want to punt anything.
Okay, yeah. So if Khurram is probably one of those folks that has, I would dare say, most experience working in BlueYonder Cloud in generally in the industry. So Khurram, if you can talk to this, that what might be the hardest thing in working in the cloud?
So some of the things that Saad had mentioned, which are the mythbusters, those are the important conversations to have, and they're very important, right? To make sure you're not taking anything for granted. At the same time, you understand limits of your own organization. Some things like even printing can become challenging if you don't start to have those conversations early on to make sure how that is going to work, because essentially you're bringing a system to still work within your network. Everything is hosted outside, but still it has to leverage your local Wi-Fi. It has to leverage your print servers, print queues, and make your environment work. So if you don't have a good Wi-Fi system, anything, all your SLAs from a cloud perspective become meaningless because it is your requirement to handle that part of it. So then when you have those conversations with cloud, they will discuss minimum bandwidth requirements, what type of device protocol and timeouts are needed. And we had to actually, some of where we have to extend the timeouts because no matter what, when you are on a WAN or a type framework, those timeouts can come into play. From challenges from customization standpoint, again, it is your organization's burden to have good design documents always be available, especially with Stay Current program. You have to provide a good design because whatever your requirements are today, you need to worry about 6 months, 1 year from now, somebody else picking those up and converting them into whatever upgrade is coming, right? Or if it's a feature is available within the upgraded version of BY, can we leverage it? So make sure you have good designs, good testing requirements outlined in anything you do, from writing a workflow to a simple Mocha command. All those are important, and that is still a burden on your organization to have those documents be there. And stay current actually will require you to have those given with every change that happens. I also want to emphasize there are changes that your organization, is not technically going to do as development, right? You can say that going under the radar. For example, you're creating workflows or you're creating page builders. You're going under the radar because you're not making any file changes in the system. So cloud is not aware of it. You're just making database changes. But if you're not tracking them or properly migrating them to higher environments, it can become challenging when you are asking for any support from cloud, because now things are executing and they have to be able to validate the outcome coming out. So again, treat every change as a change, document it, and manage it. Okay, go ahead, Saad.
So thanks. So basically, idea being, again, no expect magic. Best practices is what would help in that situation. So Khurram, what would be the performance or network issues? So you mentioned that some of the lags are basically inherent to working in a WAN. Any other thing that people should watch out for in our performance and network related issues?
So main thing that I've observed is some of the timeouts that are inherently in there in the RDT setting for devices. We had to extend them a little bit because of the WAN structure. The other part of it was what type of WAN setup you're doing, because generally within your own organization, you are setting up some type of localized route through your service provider, right? But when you're going to cloud, you may be relying on public networks to get that bandwidth coming in. So making sure, again, redundancy is part of it, because you need to make sure you have enough pipes available. But because it is a public channel coming in, or how you have set it up to access cloud, there could be latency challenges that you need to be aware of. So just make sure that is something that is squarely on you. Cloud can give you recommendations, but that setup, that contract with whoever is your provider is squarely on you. So be sure to meet the required latency requirements from cloud and keep that in front of you when you are creating that type of contract with your providers.
That's great. So basically, again, doing some of this stress testing early on, making sure that we do the best practices would go a long way. It is an Azure network, so it's we are getting like a fourth quadrant company in that respect. So it's all could be good. There was one question about refs custom development. So we would have a webinar on that exactly, but just at a very high level. Yes, web screens can be customized. Web screens can be put in rollout, so we know how to do it, all the aspects of it. Even in a cloud environment, the changes can be done. Again, but the same question goes that lease versus buy analogy. All we are saying is that it can be done, but then what you need to make sure is that everything is okayed by BlueYonder and it's allowed per your specific arrangement in cloud. So that's all I had. I don't have any other questions. There is one question that just popped up about what could be a single versus multi-tenant challenges. If you are talking about multi-tenant as in single cloud instance having multiple customers, so that is not something which is available today as a solution. So today, for example, you even though I said that don't worry about infrastructure and platform, under the hood, you will have a VM for yourself. So today's solution is not that your Mocha instance is serving two different customers today. So in that respect, you really will not have much of a single or multi-tenant challenge because it's your own system beyond the network. Khurram, anything else you want to add to the question that what could be a single versus multi-tenant challenge?
Yeah, so as stated, currently BlueYonder is isolating a customer to their own database, right? So if you go to the database through any connection, SQL or Mocha level, you cannot see outside your own space. So it will not do multi-warehousing across two different customers. And then they are also limiting other things like remote calls and generally. So you cannot even, let's say you can try to find their IP scheme and so on and try to guess on it and do remote calls. You won't be able to do that. So remote calls are not allowed within production space. So they are managing it from that perspective and isolating the application and the database servers to single tenant for now.
Yeah, so in that respect, that's generally thing when you're working more abstractly like us, if you made a support call or something like that, and amount of load on the support and those kinds of things, but that is a general statement to make that how much load could be on their support ticket system and whatnot. But in the otherwise, I would not expect much of a challenge for somebody coming from a on-premise solution by going to as it exists today.
There's another thing I want to add to. So again, I want to keep emphasizing that please do understand what is under the umbrella of cloud offering, and it is no less, no more than that, right? So assumptions can be a killer in that. So for example, all the changes that you have to do to test to production, like rollouts and so on, it's still your responsibility as to how you time to promote them. When do you allow for a downtime, right? Is have all the rollouts made to the target environment or not? That is still your responsibility. You just have, in that sense, cloud available as an extension to your IT organization. But from a business owner standpoint, the requirement is yours, right? So if you do not create a Salesforce ticket to promote a critically needed rollout from test to production, and you're seeing some failures in production, it'll still be yours to reason with, to say, why did not I create that ticket in time? Or if you say you can apply the rollout at midnight, and the warehouse complains and says, oh, we had 2 active shipments at that time, that is still on you that you did not communicate to the warehouse to say that midnight is a downtime because we are making a change into it, right? So all those things are still, as an organizational responsibility, communication, managing of changes and so on. Cloud is just an extension to execute all those things, right? You tell them, they'll do it. They're not gonna make 5 warning shots to say, oh, are we going to take this one down and things like that. So just be aware of all those things.
So again, communication is the key. So then there's one other question from me that about Autotest, is that an open source? So it's not an open source solution. It is our IP. It is something which is developed by SmartIS. So it is built on using Java platform and etc. And so it's not an open source solution. So there's a cost for it.
But it is extensible. If you know Mocha, you can add your own scripts if you want.
Yeah, but it is open from the point of view that once you get the solution, and if you then want to have 3 custom screens, that is all possible by anybody, by end users as well. Thank you, guys. Bye.